When I discovered 98 brand new homes, valued at $34 million, sitting on land I'd owned for 3 decades, I realized that HOA Karen thought she had pulled off the perfect scam. Too bad she had just handed me the deed to her entire subdivision. Imagine coming home to find an entire neighborhood built where your cattle once roamed. Families unloading U-Hauls, kids drawing on driveways all on your land without permission. Victoria Ashworth had the nerve to serve me with a restraining order, claiming I was threatening families with surveying equipment. This woman stole my land. Then painted me as the dangerous neighbor terrorizing innocent kids. What she didn't realize was that my grandfather's 1924 contract meant that every house she built automatically became mine the moment they laid the first foundation. Soon enough, she'd learn why it's a mistake to steal from a land surveyor who's spent 40 years documenting property theft, especially when federal law is on your side. But before we get into that, imagine what you'd do if someone built 98 homes on your land. Drop your revenge thoughts below and let me know where you're watching from. I'm Ezekiel Thornfield, but friends call me Zeke. At 67, I've spent 4 decades as a land surveyor, walking property lines and resolving boundary disputes across 3 counties. My grandfather passed down to me 847 acres of prime land in 1994. Along with some valuable advice: boy, never trust a man who measures land without getting his boots muddy. The morning mist in Millbrook County smells of honeysuckle mixed with diesel exhaust from the nearby highway, a sign of progress creeping into farming territory. Each day, I walk my fence lines with a cup of black coffee, listening to gravel crunch under my boots and checking for storm damage. The taste of well water and the scent of cattle remind me that this is real farming, not the suburban fantasy taking over Tennessee. My late wife, Martha, used to say I kept property records like some men obsess over baseball cards, with a pride that bordered on insanity. After she passed 5 years ago, our kids moved away to Chase City, lives in Portland and Atlanta. I can't blame them for wanting more excitement than watching grass grow, but it left me in our 1952 farmhouse, alone with my cattle and memories. Then came Victoria Ashworth. Call her Vicky. The type of woman who treats a clipboard like a weapon and speaks in corporate jargon that could even make Gandhi want to throw punches. At 52, she's mastered the look of a suburban hoe president, blonde highlights fresh from the salon, a white Lexus SUV washed weekly, and the cold smile of someone who reports neighbors for having the wrong shade of nail box. Vicky's married to Brad Ashworth, the town councilman, which in Sweetwater Springs means she thinks she's royalty. For 8 years, she circled my property like a vulture, sending intermediaries with insulting offers for my unused pasture land. The desperation was stronger than her department store perfume every time she showed up uninvited with another generous proposal. The real trouble started when I returned from a 3-week visit to Oregon, where I'd been helping my daughter Sarah through a messy divorce. I'd been looking forward to getting back to my quiet routine: coffee at sunrise, checking cattle, maybe fixing fence posts if I felt up to it. You know, the kind of retirement that doesn't involve conference calls or HOA drama. But as I drove up my gravel driveway, something didn't feel right. Instead of the usual sounds of cattle lowing and meadowlarks singing, I was greeted by the suburban symphony of lawnmowers and children's shrieks, sounds that didn't belong on my back 40 acres. I grabbed my surveying equipment and headed toward the noise, thinking maybe some kids were trespassing or a family had broken down near my property line. As I walked through my pasture, the air was thick with unfamiliar smells of fresh asphalt and new lumber, not the wildflowers and creek water I was used to. What I found made my coffee mug slip from my hands and shatter against a limestone rock. 98 pristine houses spread across my land like a suburban plague. Manicured lawns where my Angus cattle once grazed. A decorative stone entrance with Heritage Meadows Estates in fancy script, like it was an invitation to a wedding. Families were unpacking U-Hauls, kids were drawing chalk art on the driveways, and golden retrievers were chasing tennis balls, the whole American dream planted right on top of my pasture. I stood there, staring like a tourist who had somehow driven to the wrong county. But there was my grandfather's oak tree, with Martha's initials carved in the bark. There was Willow Creek, where I'd learned to fish. This was my land, but someone had turned it into suburbia without even asking. That's when Vicky appeared in a golf cart, sporting an official HOA badge, heading toward me with the look of someone who thought she owned the place because, judging by her smug face, she believed she did. "Excuse me, sir," she announced in that sickly sweet tone that made my jaw tighten. "This is private property. Heritage Meadows is a gated community for residents and invited guests only." I glanced around at my trees, my creek, the land where my grandfather had taught me to honor property boundaries, and where I now realized I was about to receive a first-hand lesson in small-town corruption. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the rage building up inside me, "I believe there's been a mistake. This is my land. I've owned it since 1994. Vicky's laugh sounded like fingernails scraping a chalkboard. "Oh, sweetie, I think you're confused. The Heritage Meadows development was bought legally from Millbrook Development Corporation 2 years ago." She pulled out a thick folder, flipping through its contents with the smug confidence of someone who had never faced resistance. "See right here. 847 acres purchased at fair market value. I'm sure this is just a surveying error on your part." The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike. But after 40 years of property disputes, I knew to document everything and stay composed when someone's trying to steal from you. "Mind if I take a look at those documents? I'm not obligated to share HOA details with trespassers," she sniffed, clutching the folder as if it held the launch codes for a nuclear missile. "But since I'm feeling generous today, these families have children starting school in 2 weeks. Surely we can work out something that won't disrupt their lives." That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. This was a scam dressed up as suburban righteousness. 3 days later, Deputy Mike Eshworth knocked on my door with legal papers and a smirk that told me all I needed to know about fair treatment in this county. The restraining order claimed I'd trespassed on Heritage Meadows property and threatened residents with surveying equipment in a threatening manner. Apparently, carrying a measuring tape was now considered brandishing a weapon. The order forbade me from entering my own land, and Mike made sure to warn me that any violation would result in jail time. But Vicky wasn't done using her suburban power trip. Within a week, every resident of Heritage Meadows received a letter about the unstable former landowner who posed a danger to families and children. And she organized a neighborhood safety committee that patrolled my property line like border patrol agents, snapping photos of me feeding my own cattle as if I were running an illegal operation. The social media onslaught followed. Vicky posted side-by-side photos on the Sweetwater Springs Facebook group, my weathered farmhouse next to the pristine subdivision, claiming my unclean property was attracting vermin and lowering property values. The comments exploded into a digital battle between the locals who knew my family and newcomers who had fallen for Vicky's act. But this is where 40 years of surveying experience paid off. While Vicky played the victim online, I headed to the county courthouse and started digging through records. The filing fee for the alleged property transfer caught my attention immediately, only $50. Back in my early days of surveying, I learned that Tennessee requires large property transfers to have notarized affidavits with multiple witnesses and filing fees that match the value of the transaction. This whole situation smelled fishier than old catfish left out too long. The real kicker was the notary stamp. Eleanor Hutchins, a sweet old lady who'd handled real estate closings for over 3 decades, was the notary. She made the best beach cobbler in the county. The problem? Eleanor had passed away 6 months before she allegedly notarized my property transfer. Unless she'd been signing documents from beyond the grave, someone had forged her stamp. I called my old surveyor buddy, Clarence Bulldog McKenzie, a man who knew more about property law than most lawyers. Bulldog spent 2 days with his GPS equipment walking every inch of my land, spitting tobacco juice and muttering about amateur or fraud. "Veek," he finally said, "your property lines are accurate within 6 inches. That whole subdivision is sitting on your land like fleas on a hound dog." While I was working on building my case, Vicky escalated to psychological warfare. Sentinel Security Services began patrolling Heritage Meadows in golf carts with radio headsets, as if my Angus cattle were a national security threat. Then came a complaint to the state licensing board, claiming I was mentally declining and posed a public safety risk. Her evidence was that I insisted on accessing my own property. The county piled on by threatening to condemn my farmhouse as a public nuisance. Apparently, 70 years of honest wear made my home an eyesore when compared to the cookie-cutter McMansions now occupying my pasture. That evening, as I checked my fence line in the fading light, I noticed something that made my skin crawl: security cameras hidden in my oak trees, with cables snaking back toward Heritage Meadows. The sharp door of electrical connections and freshly cut plastic told the whole story. They'd been tapping into my power meter to operate their surveillance equipment. Years ago, I'd helped a client catch copper thieves using an electromagnetic field detector from the hardware store, and the same method uncovered months of unauthorized surveillance. I sat in Martha's garden, crickets chirping around me and the fragrance of her climbing roses filling the evening air, contemplating whether I should just take whatever money Vicky offered and retire somewhere warm. Then I remembered my grandfather's words from when the railroad company tried to steal our mineral rights back in '89. Son, when someone tries to take your land, they're not just after dirt. They're stealing your family's history. Martha had agreed, jotting in her journal that night, Zeke never backs down from protecting what's right. It was time to honor that legacy. 2 weeks later, Vicky played her media card. Channel 7 News arrived at Heritage Meadows as if they were covering a presidential assassination, complete with a satellite truck and enough camera equipment to film a blockbuster. The story: elderly man's delusions endanger young families. They interviewed concerned mothers clutching designer babies, painted me as a confused hermit stuck in the past, and gave Vicky 5 uninterrupted minutes to perform her Oscar-worthy victim act. "We just want to live peacefully," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with tissues that appeared suspiciously dry. "It breaks my heart to see someone so confused. But we can't let one person's mental decline endanger our children." The segment made me look like the villain in a Lifetime movie about suburban terror. But while Vicky was busy winning Emmy Awards for fake crying, I was doing what surveyors do best: following paper trails and connecting the dots. The very next morning, my property insurance was canceled. The letter claimed that the significant change in land usage evidenced by aerial photos showing residential development voided my policy. Here's something interesting I learned when I helped my neighbor Jim catch insurance fraud back in '03. Agents sometimes use inside access to trigger cancellations, leaving victims vulnerable right before something unfortunate happens. Turns out, Vicky worked part-time for Mutual Trust Insurance, the same company that dropped me. She'd used her database access to sabotage my coverage, timing it perfectly alongside her legal assault. The true face of the legal system came to light when Judge Harold Pitton scheduled an emergency hearing. Pitton played golf with Brad every Thursday and owned stock in 3 development companies. Conflict of interest wasn't in his vocabulary. My court-appointed lawyer showed up smelling of bourbon, mispronounced my name twice, and advised me to accept reality and negotiate. When I demanded a jury trial, they postponed it indefinitely, probably hoping I'd die of old age first. Meanwhile, Vicky convinced the Heritage Meadows families that their property values would plummet if the crazy old man won. She set up a defense fund and raised $50,000 for legal expenses. Funny how that money ended up funding the Ackworth's European vacation. Brad's Facebook photos from Tuscany, complete with wine tours, were quite revealing. The residents organized car washes and bake sales, and knowingly funding their own exploitation with the fervor of cult followers. But I wasn't idle. Every conversation was recorded on my smartphone with an app Sarah had installed, complete with timestamps and GPS coordinates that would hold up in federal court. Trail cameras were set up around my property, all positioned legally, capturing every part of their harassment campaign. The intimidation quickly escalated. Dead animals started appearing on my porch, mostly possums, but someone even upgraded to a raccoon that smelled like old roadkill. Nails were scattered across my driveway, flattening my truck tires twice. Anonymous calls promised. Accidents happened to stubborn old men, always at 3 a.m., when the threat felt most real. They blocked access to my own mailbox, claiming it was on Heritage Meadows easement property. Sentinel security guards threatened to arrest me if I tried to collect my own mail. The irony of stealing mail while accusing me of trespassing wasn't lost on anyone with half a brain. That's when my guardian angel arrived wearing jeans and carrying a notebook. Ruby Morgan, an investigative reporter for the Nashville Tribune, had moved to small-town Tennessee seeking peace after burning out from big city life. She approached me after seeing Channel 7's Bias segment. Her legal instincts screamed that something was rotten beyond my septic tank. "Mr. Thornfield," she said, "I've covered enough white-collar crime to spot a con job. Mind if I look at your documentation?" Ruby spent 3 days independently reviewing public records, confirming my ownership, and uncovering Heritage Meadows marketing materials dating back 2 years before the alleged purchase. Her experience with financial fraud told her that internet archives don't lie. The Wayback Machine revealed archived web pages showing development plans from 2021, proving it was all premeditated. She uncovered Brad's sealed juvenile record, which detailed his previous involvement in real estate fraud in Kentucky. Our town councilman had a history of stealing property, but never on this large a scale. The county upped the ante with threats of eminent domain, claiming that Heritage Meadows provided necessary housing for community growth. They appraised my 847 acres at just $80.00 for agricultural use, conveniently ignoring its potential $12 million residential value. It was the classic government theft: steal land for pennies, then hand it to developer cronies for millions. Soon, my water well was contaminated overnight. My cattle began showing signs of poisoning, which we traced back to storm drain runoff from Heritage Meadows. The subdivision had been violating environmental laws, leaching toxic construction runoff into the groundwater that fed my well and Willow Creek. That stress eventually caught up with me, leading to a hospital admission for chest pains. The doctors recommended reducing stress and suggested assisted living. That's when Vicky showed her true colors, visiting me in the hospital with crocodile tears and a $200,000 settlement offer. "Zeke," she whispered, leaning over my hospital bed like a vulture, "this could all go away tomorrow. Think about your family. Is it really worth dying over dirt?" Lying there, with heart monitors beeping, the scent of antiseptic burning my nostrils, and for needles poking my arm, I realized this wasn't just a property dispute. It was about stopping criminals who had victimized an entire community, all while hiding behind a mask of suburban respectability. It was time to fight back. Getting out of that hospital bed felt like waking from a nightmare straight into a war zone. While I'd been playing the invalid, Vicky and Brad had been busy solidifying their theft with political maneuvering slick enough to make Vegas con artists look like amateurs. Brad introduced an emergency city council resolution to annex Heritage Meadows into Sweetwater Springs city limits. It was a bureaucratic move that hit me like a brick to the head. If passed, city jurisdiction would override county property laws, placing the subdivision under municipal control, where Brad's influence ran deeper than a Tennessee sinkhole. They'd fast-tracked the vote for 10 days out, burying the notice in legal classifieds that only lawyers and land surveyors would bother reading. Ruby's investigation kicked into overdrive, uncovering document fraud that made Watergate look like child's play. Computer forensics revealed that Brad's operation was copying and pasting notary stamps, stealing digital signatures from legitimate transactions as easily as a teenager pirating movies. The Eleanor Hutchins forgery wasn't an isolated incident. They had been grave robbing the identities of dead notaries across 4 counties. Meanwhile, Heritage Meadows residents began receiving HOA special assessments so high they could make a loan shark blush. Vicky demanded thousands per household to fund their legal battle, threatening foreclosure for those who didn't pay. She was literally extorting the very people she claimed to protect, charging them exorbitant fees to defend property they didn't legally own. The irony was thicker than Martha's cornbread. The residents were unknowingly paying to steal their own money. Several families reached out to me in secret, trembling voices on phone calls made after midnight when their children were asleep. They were beginning to question why their HOA queen needed payments for a BMW just to fight one old man with a measuring tape. I hired an independent building inspector with Ruby's newspaper budget. Turns out, journalistic integrity sometimes comes with funding for exposing corruption. What he found made my surveyor's soul ache. There were 47 major code violations, including houses built on wooden platforms over buried swampland without proper septic permits. The electrical systems violated county fire codes so badly that one spark could turn Heritage Meadows into a suburban inferno. Vicky's desperation reached a new low when she attempted to bribe Dr. Stevens to declare me mentally incompetent. She offered him $20,000 to falsify a dementia diagnosis and recommend guardianship proceedings. The good doctor recorded every word. She had also hired a sleazy private investigator to fabricate false stories about my military service claims so absurd that any veteran could debunk them over a cup of coffee. Then came the environmental bombshell. Ruby discovered that Heritage Meadows had been built over federally protected wetlands without EPA permits, violating more environmental laws than an oil spill. The original survey had been falsified by Brad's consulting company, which claimed the sensitive marshland was insignificant grassland. They had destroyed rare salamander breeding grounds, triggering violations of the Endangered Species Act, which carried daily fines of $25,000, enough to buy every house in the subdivision twice over. Finally, Danny Kowalski, the former construction foreman, broke his silence after months of threats against his family. He provided copies of the real environmental survey, plus photos of Brad ordering crews to dump concrete over protected wetlands. Danny had quit rather than participate in the environmental destruction, and he'd been harassed ever since for having a conscience, something that seemed rare in the construction industry these days. Ruby's financial investigation traced the funding for Heritage Meadows through more shell companies than a three-card Monte game, connecting it to overseas accounts that screamed money laundering louder than a tornado siren. The construction loans had been secured with my property as collateral, all without my knowledge, creating fraud so obvious that the bank executives involved would be facing federal conspiracy charges. When this house of cards inevitably came down, the homeowner's realization was swift and brutal. Property deeds became worthless, title insurance excluded contested land coverage, and families found themselves on the brink of losing their homes, still owing mortgages on houses they never legally owned. Secret meetings among the residents started popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, all discussing class action lawsuits against those who had sold them the American dream built on environmental destruction. Vicky then announced a Heritage Meadows Family Festival, a last-ditch effort to garner public sympathy. Politicians, law enforcement, and the media were all invited to witness how normal families were being terrorized by one disturbed neighbor. She'd scheduled the event for the same day as the city council annexation vote, planning to pressure politicians with images of children enjoying bounce houses while the crazy old farmer was portrayed as trying to steal their homes. But who could play that timing game? Ruby managed to coordinate federal EPA inspectors to schedule their wetlands investigation on festival day. Danny agreed to testify about the environmental cover-ups. Meanwhile, I had assembled evidence packages that laid out the full scope of the fraud, including my grandfather's 1924 railroad contracts that these amateurs had never bothered to research. The stage was set for a showdown that would expose to decades of corruption in front of half the county. The sweet smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy would soon mix with the acrid scent of burning lies. Vicky thought she was orchestrating a PR victory to cement her theft. What she didn't realize was that she was about to learn why it's a bad idea to steal from a man who's been documenting every inch of land in 3 counties. The festival day was approaching, and I planned to give Heritage Meadows a celebration they'd never forget. Ruby's call at 6:00 a.m., 3 days before the festival, changed everything. "Zeke, get down to the courthouse basement right now. I found something that's going to blow this case apart like dynamite in a hen house." I drove through thick morning fog, my heart pounding harder than a teenager on his first date. Ruby met me at the courthouse back entrance, wild-haired and clutching coffee-stained papers as if she'd just discovered the holy grail hidden under years of bureaucratic dust. "The railway archives," she gasped, pulling me down creaky stairs that smelled of mothballs and forgotten promises. I was researching easement law for another story when I found these beauties. She laid out yellowing documents across a table under fluorescent lights that flickered like dying lightning bugs. Original 1924 railroad easement contracts sealed in manila envelopes that hadn't seen daylight since Eisenhower was president. The musty paper crackled under my fingers like autumn leaves, and in that moment, I could almost hear my grandfather's voice echoing across 9 decades. Your grandfather was a stone-cold genius, Zeke. Look at Clause 7. My hands trembled as I read the faded typewriter text, which would make modern lawyers weep with envy. Ezekiel Thornfield, Sr., hadn't just negotiated mineral rights with the Tennessee Central Railroad. He had secured development protection stronger than Fort Knox. Any unauthorized construction built on Thornfield property would automatically transfer ownership to the family. Along with every improvement, fixture, and blade of grass, sweet mother of pearl, I whispered. Tasting the metallic tang of shock in my mouth, Grandpa had seen this coming a century ago. The contract language was ironclad. Unauthorized construction automatically voided any competing land claims and transferred all improvements to the rightful owner, filed with the Federal Railway Commission. It had jurisdiction that made state property laws look like mere suggestions. No county judge, city council, or Whole Queen could touch these rights. They were protected by federal transportation law. Older then sliced bread. Ruby's detective work uncovered the smoking gun. My property extended to 100 feet beyond the current survey markers, encompassing not only the 98 houses, but also the Heritage Meadows clubhouse, swimming pool, tennis courts, and the 9-hole golf course where Brad played every weekend. Satellite imagery from 2019 showed boundary stakes mysteriously relocated during one of my visits to Oregon. Total theft, Ruby calculated, spreading printouts across the table like a Vegas dealer. Your grandfather's contract makes this all yours. Vicky just handed you a $42 million gift wrapped in suburban stupidity. The irony was so rich that I couldn't help but laugh until tears streamed down my face. The 98 houses, each worth $350,000, plus amenities all mine, thanks to a contract these amateurs had never researched. The 1924 agreement had no statute of limitations, meaning their fraud had actually strengthened my position rather than threatening it. Ruby had traced Brad's connection to the Railway Historical Society, discovering he had accessed these same documents 3 years ago through genealogy research. Email evidence revealed a detailed theft plan, showing he knew about the easement clause but gambled that I'd never find the original contracts. He thought he could outsmart a family that's been documenting property rights since Warren G. Harding was president. Ruby chuckled. But he made one crucial mistake. The insurance implications were staggering. Heritage Meadows had $50 million in fraudulent coverage based on false ownership documents. When this came to light, the insurance companies would be facing liability exposure bigger than anything they could have ever imagined. Their executive bonuses were now at risk. Federal jurisdiction meant that local corruption could no longer shield the Ackworths. U.S. Marshals would enforce the 1924 contract with authority that made county sheriffs seem like mall security guards. The advantage was too great to overcome. I didn't need to prove ownership. As Grandpa's contract automatically granted it, Vicky's festival, intended to win public sympathy, would instead become her public downfall, and she was about to hand me the rope while the cameras rolled. Ruby's kitchen table disappeared under a mountain of legal documents, maps, laptops, and enough coffee cups to fuel a rocket launch. The sweet scent of her homemade blueberry muffins competed with the sharp smell of printer ink as we plotted the collapse of Heritage Meadows' suburban empire. Martha would have loved the organized chaos we were creating, driven by a righteous cause. Marcus Weber arrived dressed like federal justice itself in a sharp suit. The silver-haired prosecutor had spent for decades locking up white-collar criminals, and his wire-rimmed glasses had seen more courtroom victories than a Kentucky Derby champion. He reviewed our evidence with the precision of a surgeon. Your grandfather's 1924 contract is tighter than bark on a tree, Marcus said, fretting the yellow documents like poker cards. I've prosecuted 12 railway easement cases. This language is so bulletproof it could stop a freight train. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot joined via video call, her APA credentials adding environmental felonies to our growing list of charges. The wetlands damage assessment made my surveyor's heart sink. $15 million to restore habitat that took centuries to develop naturally, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to testifying before Congress. The salamander species they destroyed is federally protected. Daily fines pile up faster than a teenager's credit card debt. We're talking generational bankruptcy. Danny Kowalski arrived looking like a man who had been carrying the weight of concrete guilt for months. The former construction foreman spread blueprints across Ruby's table, revealing engineering disasters that would make any builder's insurance agent faint. These houses are death traps on stilts, Danny said, his finger tracing the foundation plans. Brad had ordered pressure-treated lumber instead of proper concrete pilings to save money. Families are living in expensive houseboats that don't know they're sinking yet. The dark humor wasn't lost on anyone. Heritage Meadows residents were literally living above their problems. Patty Goldman, our forensic accountant, connected financial dots with the zeal of someone who had just unearthed buried treasure in Excel spreadsheets. Her laptop displayed money trails that looked like drunken spaghetti art. Total fraud exceeds $89 million, Patty announced, with each number hitting like artillery shells. They pre-sold 150 lots using fake ownership documents. Bernie Madoff would be impressed by this Ponzi scheme's ambition. Ruby coordinated our media strategy with military precision, plotting everything on a whiteboard like D-Day invasion plans. EPA inspectors would arrive at 11. During the opening ceremony, federal marshals would show up at 1. Right when the face painting began. My story would go live at 2, as families checked their phones over barbecue. The coordination impressed even my own love of detailed planning. The EPA would handle environmental crimes. The FBI would cover financial fraud. And the U.S. Marshals would serve papers that local corruption could no longer touch like a Swiss watch designed by furious federal agents. My biggest concern was protecting the innocent families trapped in Vicky's web. Marcus had researched victim compensation programs, while I had worked out fair rent-to-own agreements for residents who wanted to stay. These people had bought into the American dream from professional liars, I thought, tasting the sharp edge of determination that meant no compromises. We would expose the criminals without ruining the lives of the casualties. Ruby's team transformed into a documentary crew, using discreet recording equipment, live streaming capabilities, and evidence collection systems to capture every moment for federal prosecution and social media transparency. The cooperation required acting skills I didn't know this old surveyor possessed. I would pretend to negotiate with Vicky during the festival, keeping her distracted while federal agents positioned themselves around Heritage Meadows like chess pieces. Reverend James Mitchell provided the moral authority that small-town corruption couldn't dismiss. His Methodist church would shelter displaced families, and his deep knowledge of the Thornfield family's century-long presence in the community gave weight to our cause. Professional exhibits prepared for the media would tell the story without words. Before and after photos of wetlands destruction, side-by-side comparisons of forgeries, and evidence of water contamination would make evening news editors weep with journalistic joy. Our backup plans covered every worst-case scenario, from local interference to flight risks. Evidence was stored in multiple secure locations. Civil rights attorneys were on standby for retaliation, and 3 national news networks had contacts warming up for potential coverage. The evening before the festival, I visited Martha's grave as the sunset painted the sky in colors she had always loved, soft purples and golds that reminded me why this land mattered far more than Moan. Why or property rights. Her journal entry from our 20th anniversary echoed in my memory. Zeke fights for what's right, not what's easy, kneeling beside her headstone, breathing in the sweet scent of honeysuckle that grew wild around her resting place. I made a promise. Tomorrow would expose 20 years of corruption while protecting the families who had been victimized by their own dreams. Vicky had planned a festival to celebrate her theft. Instead, she was about to host the most expensive public confession in Tennessee history, served with a side of federal justice and broadcast live to anyone with internet access. The irony tasted sweeter than Ruby's blueberry muffins. Festival morning arrived with perfect weather, the kind that made Vicky believe God himself endorsed her suburban theft. Heritage Meadows gleamed like a movie set, adorned with enough balloons and banners to make Disney World envious. The combined scents of barbecue smoke, cotton candy, and freshly cut grass created an atmosphere of wholesome family fun that would have been heartwarming if it weren't built on decades of deceit. Vicky had pulled out every trick from the Suburban Manipulation Handbook. Children's choirs sang at the opening ceremony. Local politicians delivered speeches about preserving family values. And media cameras focused on sympathetic families while intentionally avoiding the federal agents, strategically positioned around the festival grounds like sharply dressed wolves. The night before, someone had cut my phone and internet lines, amateur-level intimidation that had me laughing harder than a Three Stooges marathon. My truck tires were slashed again, and a threatening note appeared on my windshield, promising accidents happen to stubborn old fools. Ruby's car was spray-painted with "Me Lies" in crude lettering that looked like it came from a kindergartner's first attempt at rebellion. Brad called an emergency city council meeting for Saturday morning, rushing the Heritage Meadows annexation vote with the desperation of a used car salesman on the last day of the month. 3 council members received anonymous $10,000 donations the day before. Ruby's cameras caught the shady cash exchanges in parking lots like a low-budget spy film. My bank accounts were frozen by Friday afternoon, allegedly due to suspicious activity and a money laundering investigation. The bank manager, Brad's brother-in-law, refused to explain anything beyond bureaucratic jargon that would impress a tax attorney. Suddenly, I couldn't access any funds for legal fees or even basic necessities, an act of financial warfare designed to starve me into submission. Vicky ramped up the family manipulation, telling residents, "I plan to bulldoze houses immediately after winning, leaving children homeless before school starts." She created fake social media profiles to spread rumors about my mental health with the dedication of a teenage cyberbully. Heritage Meadows parents organized protective patrols around the subdivision as if their children were facing an invasion from one old man with surveying equipment. The destruction of construction evidence began overnight. Crews arrived with truckloads of clean soil to cover up contaminated areas, attempting to hide environmental violations before the PA inspection. Danny documented the cover-up with hidden cameras, capturing federal obstruction of justice, which carried a potential 5-year prison sentence. Brad contacted state environmental officials, claiming Ruby's investigation was fake news, ranging for a local TV station to interview concerned residents about media harassment. Social media bots flooded posts about Heritage Meadows, leaving supportive comments that all seemed written by the same person using a thesaurus. Vicky hired one of Nashville's most aggressive law firms, filing a $50 million defamation lawsuit against Ruby and her newspaper. They demanded a retraction of all fraud-related stories and attempted to secure injunctions to block coverage on festival day. Essentially, they were trying to win through legal intimidation what they couldn't achieve through actual innocence. Someone tipped off the PA inspectors about security threats at the festival, filing anonymous complaints about federal overreach and harassment of working families. Brad's political connections pressured the PA to delay the investigation, playing jurisdictional games that would make constitutional lawyers weep. The community split in two. Like a poorly planned subdivision, longtime residents picked sides based on old grudges, and local businesses were threatened with boycotts for supporting either side. Even the Chamber of Commerce divided faster than a divorce settlement. Private security ramped up around Heritage Meadows, with guards following Ruby while she worked, and marked cars parked outside my property overnight, and harassment campaigns that included construction noise starting at 6 every morning. The constant smell of diesel exhaust and dust became daily reminders that Vicky would destroy the peaceful countryside to protect her theft. Danny Kowalski began receiving death threats, complete with family photos marked with red X's, a form of witness intimidation that crossed federal lines into terrorism territory. His employer was pressured to fire him for unreliable behavior, forcing the FBI to place him in witness protection. Vicky's desperation sunk to new lows when she contacted my adult children in Oregon and Georgia, claiming their father was having a mental breakdown and suggesting guardianship proceedings to seize his assets. She insinuated that I was honoring Martha's memory by fighting for our family land, an act of defiance that would make even the most skilled manipulators take notes. The insurance scam was exposed when Ruby uncovered that Heritage Meadows policies had been printed on stolen letterhead from legitimate companies. Residents' homeowner insurance would be voided because the policies never actually existed, leaving families facing financial ruin without coverage. Brad filed emergency motions to halt the federal investigation, shopping for friendly judges and claiming that the agencies had no jurisdiction over local property disputes. He flooded the court with procedural motions designed to delay and confuse legal warfare that made tax codes look like a beginner's guide. Festival Day became the ultimate showdown, where truth would clash with suburban lies beneath the bright Tennessee sun. Media crews arrived like reinforcements, and federal agents discreetly took their positions. Tensions in the community reached a boiling point. The smell of funnel cakes and the innocent laughter of children soon mixed with the bitter taste of exposed corruption and the cold reality of federal justice. Festival morning arrived with the kind of stifling humidity that made Tennessee summers infamous, and tempers shorter than a roadside firecracker. Heritage Meadows looked like a twisted version of Norman Rockwell's dream. Red, white, and blue bunting decorated stolen land, while children's laughter echoed across wetlands that had been destroyed for suburban development. Vicky orchestrated her final performance at the festival gazebo, staging a public settlement meeting with the subtlety of a Broadway musical. She brought microphones, speakers, and an oversized $300,000 cardboard check, performing for the cameras like she was accepting an Academy Award for Best Supporting Victim. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said to the gathering crowd, dabbing her eyes with tissues that seemed suspiciously dry, "I'm here to show how reasonable people can resolve conflicts without destroying families." The oversized check fluttered in the breeze, like a surrender flag made of lies. I played my part in this farce, pretending to consider her offer while federal agents took up strategic positions around the festival grounds. The smells of barbecue and cotton candy couldn't disguise the metallic taste of justice drawing nearer, faster than an approaching summer storm. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot arrived quietly during the children's puppet show, carrying EPA testing equipment hidden inside a family picnic basket. She began collecting soil and water samples around the festival area, finding fresh concrete poured over wetlands overnight, tampering with evidence that would now add federal obstruction charges to the growing list. Ruby's financial investigation uncovered the international money laundering ring funding Heritage Meadows that morning. It turned out the development was backed by Russian shell companies linked to a real estate fraud network spanning 12 states. Brad Ashworth wasn't just a small-town crook, he was tied to an international criminal enterprise that made local corruption look like petty theft. Maria Santos, a local elementary school teacher who lived in Heritage Meadows with her two young daughters, approached Ruby during the face-painting activity. Her hands trembled as she revealed forged notary signatures on her deed. Recognizing Brad's handwriting from his campaign materials, "I trusted them," Maria whispered, glancing nervously at her kids getting butterfly designs on their cheeks. "They told us we were buying our forever home. But everything was lies." Her bravery would become the crack that shattered Vicky's weight of community protection. The media ambush happened during lunch when Brad arranged a surprise TV interview, trying to discredit me. Channel 7's cameras rolled as he painted me as a confused old man threatening innocent families with delusions of property ownership. The interview was interrupted by federal marshals serving arrest warrants live on TV. Brad's smug expression turned to panic in an instant, as handcuffs clicked around his wrist. His protests about deep state conspiracies and government overreach were perfectly timed for the evening news soundbites. Vicky's meltdown began when she realized that Brad's arrest had exposed their entire scheme. Standing next to the bounce house where toddlers played, she began screaming at the federal agents about constitutional rights and government persecution. Her accusations that the EPA was part of a liberal conspiracy against honest Americans were caught on dozens of phones, creating viral social media content that destroyed what little credibility she had left. Ruby's newspaper released the full evidence package online while families ate barbecue and checked their phones. Interactive timelines revealed 4 years of fraud. Financial records proved international money laundering, and document comparisons showed systematic forgery. The truth spread across the internet faster than local gossip, bypassing the corruption that had taken hold of the community. Reverend Mitchell organized an emergency meeting at the Methodist Church, offering sanctuary to displaced families while legal aid volunteers provided free consultations. Local businesses stepped up with job offers for residents facing financial hardships, showing that genuine community spirit could still survive suburban greed. EPA testing confirmed groundwater contamination affecting the entire area, forcing immediate evacuation of Heritage Meadows families to a local motel at federal expense. The water supply was deemed unsafe, and the cleanup was estimated to cost $25 million. With restoration taking decades, U.S. Marshals secured Heritage Meadows as the scene at Heritage Meadows became a federal crime zone, with residents given 48 hours to collect their personal belongings before evidence collection began. What had once represented stolen American dreams now stood as a monument to the consequences of greed disguised as community development. The web of corruption unraveled faster than cheap yarn. County Sheriff Mike Ashworth was arrested for accepting bribes. 3 city council members faced federal charges for money laundering, and the bank president was indicted for mortgage fraud. The FBI launched investigations into all of the Ashworth's business dealings, revealing a pattern of systematic theft spanning 2 decades. Vicky's attempt to flee came as federal agents closed in on her. Airport security apprehended her at Nashville International Airport with suitcases containing $2.3 million in bearer bonds, which she claimed were her retirement savings. Despite having no legitimate income to explain such wealth, the bonds were traced back to accounts in the Cayman Islands, linked to a Russian money laundering ring. National media trucks rolled in as the story picked up steam, turning a small-town festival into a spectacle of justice that would inspire constitutional law professors to use it as a case study for years. Social media hashtags like #HeritageScam and #HashJusticeFrozen trended nationally, proving that true David versus Goliath stories still resonated with the American public. The stage was set for a public confrontation that would expose decades of corruption, all while the cameras rolled. The festival gazebo transformed into an impromptu courthouse as federal agents, media crews, and half the county gathered for a showdown that would make Wild West historians envious. The sweet aroma of funnel cakes blended with the acrid tension of revealed corruption, while children's laughter provided an innocent backdrop to the collapse of Heritage Meadows' criminal empire. I stepped up to the microphone, wearing my grandfather's surveyor's compass around my neck like a symbol of strength, holding the original 1924 railroad easement document that would change everything. My voice carried across the crowd, loud and clear. Without amplification, 40 years of marking property boundaries had taught me how to project authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, locking eyes with Vicky, who stood frozen in place, her face like a deer caught in headlights. I'm here to set the record straight about my family's land and the criminals who thought they could steal it. The crowd fell silent, with only the distant hum of federal agents' radios and the flutter of evidence papers in the Tennessee breeze. I began reading key sections of my grandfather's contract aloud, explaining how the 1924 railroad easement automatically transferred ownership of any unauthorized construction to the Thornfield family. Every house, every street light, every blade of grass in Heritage Meadows belongs to me under federal law, I declared. Raising the yellow document like Moses presenting the 10 Commandments, my grandfather was wise enough to protect our family from exactly this kind of theft. Vicky pushed through the crowd like a woman possessed, grabbing the microphone with the desperation of someone watching their empire crumble in real time. This is all lies and fake documents, she screamed, her carefully curated suburban composure cracking like cheap veneer. These people are part of a conspiracy against working families. That's when U.S. Attorney Marcus Webb stepped forward, holding arrest warrants. His federal authority cut through the local corruption like a hot knife through butter. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he read the charges against Victoria Ashworth, 47 counts, including fraud, money laundering, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent, Marcus said as federal marshals placed handcuffs on Vicky. Her perfectly manicured hands seemed almost fragile in the metal restraints, symbolizing just how fragile her criminal empire had always been. Heritage Meadows residents reacted with confusion and anger, and the crowd split faster than lightning strikes. Maria Santos stepped forward to speak for the families who had been victimized by their own dreams of homeownership. "We just wanted homes for our children," she said, her voice shaking with emotion and betrayal. "We didn't know about any fraud. We trusted these people with our life savings." Some residents turned their anger on Vicky, finally seeing how thoroughly they'd been manipulated, while others defended her in a last-ditch effort to preserve the value of their property investments. The division in the community was painful to witness. Good people torn apart by criminals who hid behind suburban respectability. I took the microphone back, addressing the confused families with the compassion Martha had taught me. "You folks are victims too," I said. "This isn't your fault. We'll work together to make this right. I'm offering fair rent-to-own agreements for anyone who wants to stay while we sort out the legal mess." It was then that Dr. Sarah Lightfoot dropped an environmental bombshell, presenting soil contamination findings that silenced even the most defensive residents. The subdivision was built over toxic waste from an old chemical plant, and groundwater contamination extends far beyond Heritage Meadows, she announced. All residents must evacuate immediately for health and safety reasons. Her EPA authority brooked no argument. The water supply is contaminated, and the soil contains chemicals that pose serious health risks, especially to children. The media frenzy exploded as reporters bombarded us with questions faster than an auctioneer's chant. How had county officials missed such blatant fraud? What's the total financial loss for the victims? Will this lead to federal oversight of rural development? The story was quickly becoming a national symbol of small-town corruption and environmental destruction. County Sheriff Mike Ashworth showed up with backup officers, attempting to assert local control over federal agents in what felt like a jurisdictional standoff. If it hadn't been so pathetic, it would have been laughable. He quickly learned that he, too, was under investigation for accepting bribes when federal marshals handed him his own arrest warrant. Ruby stepped forward to provide context for the media, explaining how her investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that spanned 4 years and multiple states. She praised Danny Kowalski's bravery in exposing construction fraud and environmental cover-ups that jeopardized public health. The true mic drop moment came when I pulled out my surveyor's tape measure and walked to the property line, demonstrating exactly where Heritage Meadows was built on Thornfield land. "This tape measure doesn't lie, and like some people," I said, making eye contact with Vicky, who was being escorted into a federal transport vehicle. From the back of the police car, Vicky screamed her final outburst, "These people don't deserve nice homes anyway." The racial slurs she hurled at Hispanic families in the crowd exposed the true nature of her character, confirming the discriminatory motives Ruby had suspected all along. Festival Day had turned into a public execution of corruption. The entire scene was broadcast live across social media and picked up by national news outlets. Justice was served cold, with a side of environmental protection, all witnessed by half of Tennessee. 6 months later, Heritage Meadows stood as a deserted suburban ghost town. Yellow EPA tape fluttered in the breeze where manicured lawns had once spread their artificial perfection. The sweet scent of honeysuckle had returned, blending with the morning dew and the earthy fragrance of healthy soil as nature reclaimed the stolen land. My cattle grazed peacefully where cookie-cutter McMansions had once stood, proving that good land always outlasts bad ideas. The legal aftermath brought swift justice, executed with federal efficiency that would have made Martha smile from heaven. Vicky Ashworth was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison apparently. Orange jumpsuits don't come with HOA badges. Brad received 20 years for racketeering, while Sheriff Mike Ashworth and 3 city council members were handed 5-year terms. Courtesy of the federal penitentiary system, new oversight measures were put in place, meaning future property thieves would need better lawyers and bigger bribes to succeed. 23 Heritage Meadows families accepted my rent-to-own offers, building sustainable homes on properly zoned land that adhered to environmental regulations and respected actual property rights. Maria Santos became our community liaison. Our children now played in clean streams where toxic runoff had once flowed. Watching the kids catch salamanders in the restored wetlands reminded me why we fought so hard. The Thornfield Foundation launched with $20 million from the property windfall, funding scholarships for first-generation college students who understand that honest work always triumphs over suburban scheming. Thornfield Memorial Library stands as the cornerstone of Sweetwater Springs downtown, offering free legal aid clinics that assist property owners in protecting themselves from corporate predators with clipboards and fake smiles. 400 acres were transformed into the Thornfield Wildlife Sanctuary, preserving endangered salamanders and wetlands, and educating future generations about environmental stewardship. The Climate Research Station now attracts scientists from 3 universities, proving that conservation and education create far more jobs than fraudulent development ever could. Ruby's Pulitzer Prize launched her career at the Washington Post, but she returns every year for our Thornfield Heritage Festival. Our Emmy-winning documentary on Heritage Meadows became a staple in journalism schools, showing students that responsible reporting can literally save communities from ruin. Danny Kowalski testified before Congress about construction corruption, leading to stronger whistleblower protections that bear his name. His environmental restoration company now provides jobs to others who chose integrity over corporate pressure. It turns out honesty is more profitable than fraud. With far less risk of federal prosecution, the national impact surpassed our expectations. FBI investigations uncovered similar schemes in 47 communities, shutting down $2.3 billion in fraudulent developments. Congressional task forces established federal property verification requirements, offering families protection from professional thieves posing as community developers. I now teach surveying at the community college, sharing 40 years of experience with students who will safeguard future generations from boundary disputes and property fraud. Key lesson: accurate measurements and honest documentation build America. Everything else is just expensive decoration. Our annual Heritage Festival now celebrates true local history, featuring crafts, music, and storytelling that honor genuine community values. Former adversaries now work together on planning committees, proving that a shared purpose can heal divisions created by greed faster than any therapy session. The environmental recovery exceeded even our wildest hopes. Endangered species are returning to the restored wetlands, and educational boardwalks allow school groups to study ecosystem recovery. Research data is helping farmers adapt to climate change while safeguarding sensitive habitats. The metallic taste of morning mist over healthy wetlands is far more refreshing than suburban chlorine. Personal healing came slowly, like a Tennessee sunrise, gradually but powerfully painting everything in the colors Martha loved. I visit her grave every evening, sharing updates on community progress and scholarship recipients who benefit from our stand against corruption. Her journal's final entry still guides me. Zeke fights for what's right, not what's easy. Here's what this has taught me: standing up for what's right often means standing alone at first, but honest documentation and principled allies attract good people to your cause. My grandfather understood that land represents responsibility to future generations, who deserve better than environmental destruction disguised as progress. Property rights matter because they protect families from predators who exploit the American dream for profit. When someone tries to steal your land, they're stealing your family's history and your children's future. Have you faced HOA nightmares or property disputes? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience may give another family the courage they need to fight back against professional thieves hiding behind community development. Together, we can expose fraud before it destroys more families. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption. Your support helps us investigate small-town fraud, proving that justice prevails when honest people unite against suburban schemes and environmental harm. Thanks for watching HOA Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and share your thoughts below.